The private jet cut smoothly through the night sky, its engines humming a steady rhythm as it soared above a sea of clouds. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with opulence. Crystal glasses clinked with champagne, gold-trimmed cutlery lay neatly on linen-covered tables, and the scent of imported roses lingered in the cabin. Each passenger had been carefully selected for this journey, executives, socialites, and investors who thrived in elite circles. Among them was Veronica Hayes, a woman who had built her entire reputation on flaunting her family's wealth and belittling anyone she deemed beneath her. She had arrived draped in diamonds, her crimson gown shimmering under the cabin lights, and from the moment she boarded, she behaved as if she were the hostess of the evening. To Veronica, private jets were nothing more than another stage to parade her superiority, and tonight was no exception. Across the aisle, however, sat a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, composed, dressed in a modest gray suit that seemed almost plain in comparison to the peacocks around him. His calm presence irritated her. He didn't gawk at her jewelry, didn't rush to flatter her as others usually did, and didn't seem impressed by the atmosphere of wealth that she so desperately clung to. To her, he was an intruder in a world he didn't belong to. Veronica leaned over to the woman beside her and whispered loudly enough for half the cabin to hear, "Who let that in here? This isn't Coach." Laughter rippled from a few passengers eager to stay on her good side, though most shifted uncomfortably. The man didn't respond. He simply turned a page of the document in his hands, his focus unshaken by her sharp tongue. His silence infuriated her. She thrived on reaction, on dominance, and when he gave her none, she decided to escalate. "Excuse me," she barked, standing abruptly, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she crossed the aisle. "Do you not understand that this is a luxury flight? People like you don't belong here." Still, the man said nothing. His eyes flicked up for a moment, steady, piercing, but calm, before returning to his papers. That quiet defiance broke her thin veneer of control. Without warning, her hand snapped through the air and landed across his cheek, with a sharp crack that echoed in the cabin. Gasps erupted instantly. A flight attendant froze mid-step, a glass nearly slipping from her tray. The other passengers exchanged horrified glances, some covering their mouths, others instinctively raising their phones. Veronica smirked, brushing her hair back as if she had just corrected a disobedient servant. "That's what happens when nobodies forget their place," she announced, her voice dripping with venom. She spun on her heel and strutted back to her seat, satisfied with her performance. The cabin, however, didn't applaud her cruelty. It was filled with silence, so heavy it felt suffocating. The man slowly folded his document and set it on the table, his expression unreadable, but his eyes steady as he looked across at her. There was no anger, no outburst, no raised voice, just a chilling composure that unsettled those who witnessed it. For the first time that evening, a flicker of doubt crossed Veronica's face. She had no idea that the man she had just slapped was Daniel Carter, billionaire CEO of Carter Global Industries, and the very owner of the jet she believed was her playground. The slap still hung in the air long after Veronica had returned smugly to her seat. Her ruby lips curled in a self-satisfied smirk, as though she had re-established the natural order of things. The cabin, however, told a different story. The laughter she had expected never came. Instead, there was an uneasy silence punctuated only by the low hum of the engines. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the man she had struck and the woman who seemed to revel in her cruelty. The flight attendant who had witnessed the scene stood frozen for a moment before instinctively hurrying forward, her hands trembling as she offered the man a cool towel. "Mr. Carter," she began softly, then stopped, realizing her mistake, her eyes widening with the sudden realization that she had revealed too much. Veronica caught the name and scoffed, assuming it was a meaningless courtesy. "Mr. Carter, really? As if I care. He should be grateful he's even allowed on this flight," she said loudly, ensuring everyone heard. But her voice, once commanding, now sounded strained against the growing tension around her. The man finally set aside his papers, his gaze lifting fully to meet hers for the first time since the incident. His eyes were sharp, cold, but disturbingly calm, the kind of composure that came from a person who had no need to prove himself. He spoke with a measured voice that cut through the cabin like a blade. "You've made your statement," he said quietly, his words carrying a weight that silenced even the whispers. "The rest of this flight will determine how it reflects on you." Veronica blinked, thrown off balance by his tone, but quickly recovered, laughing harshly. "Don't threaten me, whoever you are. I could have you thrown off this plane in seconds. My family practically owns this world." Her arrogance, once amusing to some, now drew side eyes of disgust. A man 2 rows down, an investor from Singapore, leaned toward his colleague and muttered, "She doesn't know, does she?" His companion shook his head grimly, replying under his breath, "No, she has no idea." The murmurs spread, curiosity and shock building like a wave. One of the passengers, a well-known journalist, turned in his seat, his eyes narrowing as he studied the man more closely. Recognition lit up his face, and he gasped, "Wait, that's Daniel Carter." The name fell into the cabin like a thunderclap. Several passengers straightened in their seats, others whispered frantically, and one woman even dropped her phone in shock. Everyone knew the name. Daniel Carter, billionaire CEO of Carter Global Industries, one of the most influential men in the world. He wasn't just wealthy, he was a kingmaker, a man whose investments could build or break empires overnight. The jet itself, Veronica realized far too late, wasn't chartered by her circle of elites. It belonged to him. Veronica's smirk dissolved instantly, her face draining of color as she replayed the moment she had raised her hand against him. Her fingers trembled against her glass, the champagne inside trembling as much as she was. "That's impossible," she whispered to herself, though the dawning horror in her eyes betrayed her fear. Daniel leaned back in his seat, his composure unchanged, though now the balance of power was undeniable. "You asked me if I knew who you were," he said slowly, his tone calm but unyielding. "The real question, Miss Hayes, is, do you know whose jet you're on?" The words reverberated through the cabin like a verdict, and the silence that followed was heavier than the clouds outside. Veronica's carefully crafted world of entitlement began to crack, and for the first time in years, she found herself without an audience willing to applaud her cruelty. The jet touched down smoothly on the private runway, but the tension inside was far from landing. Silence hung in the air like an unbroken storm cloud. Victoria stood poised, her chin raised, exuding authority. Her assistant, Maya, had already signaled discreetly to the ground staff, waiting outside. They knew exactly what was about to unfold, and their eyes gleamed with anticipation. Mr. Lockwood, though visibly unsettled, still clung to his arrogance. "I expect you'll be hearing from my attorneys," he hissed, straightening his tie as though the act restored his sense of superiority. He had no idea that the power dynamic had shifted completely and his world was about to be dismantled. The door of the jet opened, and the first thing to greet them was a fleet of black cars and a line of security personnel. They didn't move for Lockwood, they moved for Victoria. Cameras flashed, not the prying eyes of paparazzi, but the lenses of her corporate media team, who documented key moments for her business empire. "Mrs. Harrington, we've prepared the documents," one of her legal advisors announced, stepping forward with a leather briefcase. The sound of her surname, the name tied to the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that Lockwood's company had desperately been courting, cut through the air like a blade. Lockwood blinked, his smirk faltering. "Harrington." His voice cracked as realization seeped in. "Victoria Harrington?" The weight of her full name crashed down on him. Victoria Harrington, the billionaire tech investor, philanthropist, and quiet powerhouse whose company controlled the very boardrooms Lockwood had been trying to infiltrate for years. The woman he had disrespected, insulted, and even laid his hand upon was the key to his company's survival. And he had slapped away his only lifeline. Victoria stepped down from the jet gracefully, her heels clicking against the metal stairs, each step punctuating the destruction of Lockwood's future. "You want to know who really owned this jet?" she said coolly, glancing back at him. "You're standing on her property." Every inch of this aircraft, every detail you admired before you let your temper get the better of you, it's mine, just like the deal your company was begging for. Lockwood stammered, reaching for words that refused to come. This isn't possible. We, your board invited us. My board answers to me. Victoria cut him off sharply. And now, thanks to your behavior, every door in my network will slam shut on you. You wanted respect, Mr. Lockwood. You should have started by giving it. His legs nearly buckled. The security team flanked him, not at her command, but because they could sense his growing desperation. He wasn't a threat. He was a man watching his empire crumble in real time. Then, to seal his humiliation, Victoria's assistant handed her a document. She signed it in front of him with deliberate elegance. Effective immediately, our potential $800 million partnership is terminated, she declared. And I'll ensure every other investor knows why. You didn't just insult me on my jet. You disrespected every woman who's ever had to fight for a seat at the table. The cameras clicked again, capturing Lockwood's pale, broken expression. The footage would circulate quietly in financial circles, destroying his reputation faster than any lawsuit ever could. Victoria turned without another glance, stepping into her car as the convoy prepared to leave. For her, this was just another lesson to deliver, a reminder that wealth and power weren't the same as dignity and respect. For Lockwood, however, it was the end of everything. As the doors closed around her and the convoy pulled away, Maya leaned in and whispered, "That was brutal." Victoria allowed herself a small smile. "No," she said softly, eyes fixed ahead. "That was justice." And with that, the jet behind them stood as both a symbol of luxury and a battlefield where arrogance had met its match.